The sound of the gunshot still echoes in my dreams, not the one that took Nathaniel Reed's life, that one I welcome, but the earlier shots, the ones that set my cabin ablaze while I held Sarah behind me, feeling her tremble against my back. 15 years I'd lived with ghosts, content to let grief hollow me out until I was nothing but routine and regret. Then I found her bathing in Wolf Creek, her skin bearing the map of another man's cruelty. And something stirred in my chest that I thought had died with Margaret and Thomas. What I didn't know that spring morning in 1885 was that offering shelter to a battered woman would bring a monster to my doorstep, a monster protected by law and privilege who believed owning a woman was his God-given right. I was 53, too old for heroics, with nothing but a Winchester, a hidden root cellar, and hands calloused from years of solitary labor. But sometimes, standing ground is the only choice a man has left. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Silence is a language all its own out here in the Montana wilderness. It's been 15 years since the fire took Margaret and Thomas. 15 years of nothing but the wind through the pines and the distant cry of hawks for company. My name is Hope Caldwell, and I've made peace with solitude. Or so I told myself. Spring of 1885 had been particularly harsh. The winter had dug its claws in deep, reluctant to surrender its hold on the land. My cabin stood weathered and gray against the backdrop of the Beartooth Mountains, as stubborn in its survival as I was in mine. Each day followed the same pattern: feed the horses before dawn, mend what needed mending, hunt when supplies ran low. Time measured not in hours, but in tasks completed. That day in late May started no different. And I was chopping wood near the eastern fence line, the rhythm of axe against timber the only sound for miles, when I heard it, a splash that didn't belong, not the familiar rush of Wolf Creek that cut through my property, but something deliberate, human. I set my axe down, feeling the handle's worn groove against my calloused palm one last time before following the sound. Moving quietly through the pines as Running Fox had taught me years ago, heel to toe. Weight balanced, I made my way toward the creek bend where the cottonwoods grew thick, forming a natural screen. That's where I saw her. She was waist deep in the water, her back to me. Dark hair clung to pale skin, cascading down to where the creek water embraced her waist. Morning sunlight filtered through rising steam, creating a halo effect that stopped my breath. I knew I should turn away, give her privacy, but something in the deliberate way she moved held me there. Each gesture seemed like a ritual, washing away more than just trail dust. She turned suddenly, sensing my presence, and our eyes met across the water. I expected fear, perhaps outrage, but what I saw instead was quiet resignation. Her face was striking, high cheekbones and full lips, but it was her eyes that caught me, green as summer grass, but hollow, like someone had carved out everything behind them except wariness. "I didn't know anyone lived here," she said, her voice steady despite her vulnerability. "I'll be moving on." "No need," I found myself saying. "There's a storm coming. You can use the old barn for shelter." She studied me, measuring risk perhaps. I took a step back, giving her space. "Hope Caldwell," I said, tipping my hat before turning to leave. "Supper's at sundown if you're hungry." That night, as thunder rolled across the mountains, I left a plate of venison stew on the porch and retreated inside. By morning, the plate was empty, washed clean, and left by the water pump. A small bunch of wildflowers lay beside it. I didn't know her name yet. Didn't know she was running from something darker than the storm clouds. Didn't know she'd change everything. 3 days passed before she spoke more than a few words to me. She'd introduced herself simply as Sarah. Nothing more. She worked hard, fixing a broken hinge on the barn door, gathering kindling, even patching a hole in the chicken coop I'd been meaning to fix for months. We existed in parallel, sharing space, but little else. Until I found the poster. I'd ridden into Clearwater, the nearest excuse for a town, for supplies and mail. Sheriff Blackwood stopped me outside the general store, scratching his gray-streaked beard. Seen any strangers passing through? Hope. Woman. Maybe? Something in his tone made me cautious. Lot of folks move through these parts, I said. Heading to Oregon, mostly. He handed me a wanted poster. This one's different. Keep an eye out. The paper was worn, carried from town to town, but the sketch was clear enough. Sarah Collins. It read, suspected accomplice to Nathaniel Reed, wanted for train robbery, armed assault, and murder, $500 reward. I stared at the face, her face, my throat suddenly dry. Reed's dangerous business. Blackwood continued. Left 2 railway men dead near Cheyenne. Woman might be his accomplice or his victim. Reports conflict. Either way, I'd rather find her before he does. I folded the poster carefully, tucking it inside my coat. I'll keep watch, I promised, already knowing I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. The ride home was long, my thoughts longer. I'd known men like Reed during my time as a Union scout in the war. Men who took what they wanted and called it right. The kind of men who left scars that never showed on wanted posters. When I returned, Sarah was at the creek again, this time washing clothes, my shirts alongside what few garments she owned. Her sleeves were rolled up, and I couldn't help noticing the pattern of bruises circling her wrists. Yellowing now, but still visible. Handprints. I approached slowly, making sure my boots crunched on the gravel. She looked up, pushing a strand of hair from her face with a wet hand. Sheriff Blackwood sends his regards, I said, pulling out the poster and setting it on a flat rock between us. She didn't flinch, didn't run. She just stared at the paper, then at me, her expression unreadable. Are you turning me in? She asked finally. That depends, I replied, on whether you helped Reed kill those men or whether you're running from him. Sarah looked at the creek for a long moment, watching the water flow past. I met Nathaniel in St. Louis. He was charming, educated. Said he was a businessman looking for investment opportunities out west. She smiled bitterly. By the time I realized what kind of business he was in, we were already married. June brought long days of sunlight and work. We fell into a rhythm, rising before dawn, tending the animals and garden together. She couldn't ride but was eager to learn, so I taught her on Old Bess, the gentlest mare in my small stable. I showed her how to shoot so too, my father's Remington that had gotten me through the war. She had a steady hand and a good eye. I grew up in Boston, she told me one evening as we sat on the porch, watching nighthawks dive for insects in the purple twilight. My father was a professor. He believed women should be educated, independent. She laughed softly. He'd have hated Nathaniel on sight. Smart man, your father, I said. He died before I married. Maybe if he hadn't. She shook her head. Doesn't matter now. But it did matter. The more I learned about Sarah, the more I understood she wasn't just running from Reed. She was running toward something, a version of herself she'd lost along the way. I found myself watching her when she wasn't looking, the way she hummed while kneading bread dough, How she'd pause while crossing the yard to close her eyes and turn her face to the sun. Small moments of joy reclaimed. It was dangerous, this warmth growing in my chest, dangerous to think beyond the next day, the next week. Reed was still out there, and whatever we were building here stood on borrowed time. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I was returning from the north pasture when I spotted him, a rider approaching from the main road, taking his time, too deliberate to be a lost traveler. I redirected toward the cabin, pushing my gelding into a gallop. Sarah was hanging laundry, her back to the approaching threat. She turned at the sound of hoofbeats, alarm crossing her face as she saw my expression. "Inside," I said, dismounting quickly. "Take the Remington from above the door. Anyone comes through who isn't me, you shoot." She disappeared into the cabin as I led my horse to the hitching post, deliberately unhurried. By the time the rider reached my yard, I was sitting on the porch steps, whittling a piece of pine, my hunting knife catching the afternoon light. Nathaniel Reed was younger than I'd imagined, handsome in the way of men who know it and use it. His clothes were fine, but trail-worn. His sorrel stallion high-spirited and well-bred. Everything about him spoke of money and the expectation that it opened all doors. "Afternoon," he called, his voice carrying the refined cadence of Eastern schooling. "Hope I'm not intruding. I'm looking for someone, a young woman, who may have passed this way." The following week passed in tense vigilance. I reinforced the doors, kept the horses saddled, and made sure Sarah never went to the creek alone. We spoke little, but words weren't needed. The threat of Reed hung over us like storm clouds. Sheriff Blackwood rode out on Thursday, ostensibly to check on things. I met him at the property line. "Reed's been asking all over town about you," he said without preamble. "Claims you're harboring his wife." "And what did you tell him?" "That Hope Caldwell's been alone on this mountain since before he was in short pants," the sheriff sighed, removing his hat to wipe his brow. "But he's persistent, and he's got papers, marriage certificate, letters from a doctor saying she's unstable." "And you believe that?" I asked, anger rising. "Doesn't matter what I believe. Law says a husband has rights." He looked uncomfortable. "I'm just warning you. Hope. This isn't a fight you can win." I thought of the bruises on Sarah's wrists, the shadows that sometimes still darkened her eyes when a sound startled her. "Sometimes the law is wrong, John." The sheriff replaced his hat. "Maybe so, but it's still the law." He hesitated. "Reed's hired men, 3 of them, down from Helena, rough types." That night, unable to sleep, I found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, a small leather-bound book open before her, a journal. "I couldn't sleep," she explained. "I thought writing might help." I nodded, pouring myself a glass of water. My Margaret used to do the same, said it helped her sort her thoughts. It was the first time I'd spoken Margaret's name aloud in years. Sarah seemed to understand the significance. She closed the journal. "Tell me about her," she said softly. So I did, about how Margaret taught at the one-room schoolhouse in Clearwater before the fire. How she loved poetry and wildflowers and could name every star in the night sky. How Thomas had her eyes and my stubborn chin. "The fire started in the barn," I said, the words coming easier than I'd expected. "I was in town. By the time I returned—" I swallowed hard. Nothing left but ashes. Sarah reached across the table, her hand covering mine. "I'm sorry. Hope." The simple touch, warm and real, broke something loose inside me. I should have been here, I said, the guilt as fresh as it had been 15 years ago. I could have saved them, or died with them, she said. And then where would I be? A sound outside shattered the moment, the distinctive click of a rifle being cocked. The night exploded into chaos. My shot found its mark, dropping one of Reed's men with a cry that echoed across the yard. The others scattered, returning fire that tore through the cabin walls like they were paper. I changed position, crawling beneath the windows to the other side of the room. Outside, I could hear Reed shouting orders. They were trying to surround the cabin. A flicker of movement caught my eye. Sarah, not in the bedroom where I'd sent her, but crouched by the fireplace, the Remington in her hands. "I told you to go," I hissed. Her eyes flashed in the darkness. "I'm tired of running." The attack came from the back, glass breaking. Then the whoosh of flames as a torch was thrown through the window. Fire caught the curtains, spreading quickly to the wooden floor. "Go!" I shouted at Sarah, covering her as she made for the bedroom. I followed, pausing only to fire a final shot through the shattered window. The trapdoor beneath the bed led to a small cellar I'd dug years ago as a storage space for winter provisions. A narrow tunnel, shored up with timber, extended about 20 yards, emerging in a stand of junipers near the creek. We emerged gasping into the night air, the smell of smoke heavy around us. From our position, we could see the cabin fully engulfed, flames leaping toward the sky. 3 horses were tethered nearby. Reed and his remaining men must have thought they had us trapped. "The barn," I whispered. "We need horses." We moved through the shadows, keeping to the tree line. The barn stood some distance from the cabin, so far untouched by the fire. But as we approached, a figure stepped from the darkness, Nathaniel Reed, his fine clothes now dusty, a revolver gleaming in his hand. "Sarah," he called, his voice eerily calm. "It's time to come home, my dear." She froze beside me, her whole body tensing like a deer before flight. Reed took a step closer. "You've caused quite enough trouble. These good men dead. This poor farmer's home destroyed, all because of your selfishness." I felt Sarah trembling, but when she spoke, her voice was steel. "You're the only selfish one here, Nathaniel. You and your greed and your violence." His handsome face twisted. "You're my wife, my property. The law can go to hell," I interrupted, stepping forward with my rifle raised. "And so can you." Reed's gun swung toward me. "The old man with the hero complex. Tell me, what were you hoping for? That she'd stay here and play house with you? That she'd be grateful enough to warm your bed?" The aftermath unfolded slowly, like a river finding new channels after a flood. Sheriff Blackwood was true to his word, taking our statements with minimal questioning. What surprised us both was the arrival of a telegram 2 days later from the U.S. Marshal's office in Cheyenne. It seemed Reed had been under investigation for months, suspected of involvement in not just the train robbery, but a string of bank heists across 3 territories. "They're sending a marshal to interview you," Blackwood told Sarah as we sat in his office. "Your testimony could help close several cases." She paled slightly. "And then?" "Then you're free to go. I expect Reed's dead. Justice has been served." It wasn't that simple. Of course, nothing ever is. When Marshal Cooper arrived the following week, he brought a leather portfolio filled with witness statements and crime scene reports. For 2 days, Sarah answered his questions, reliving the nightmare of her marriage to Reed, the discoveries of his crimes, her eventual flight. I sat with her through it all, silent support as she pieced together the fragments of her past. Some of what she revealed was worse than I'd imagined. Reed's calculated cruelty, the slow destruction of her confidence and will, the child she'd lost after a particularly brutal beating. "You're a brave woman, Mrs. Reed," Cooper said when they finished, closing his notebook with a sense of finality. "Collins," she corrected. "Sarah Collins. I'm reclaiming my family name." After the marshal left, we returned to what remained of my property. The cabin was gone, but the barn had survived, as had the small spring house and tool shed. The charred earth where my home had stood felt like an open wound on the landscape. "We don't have to stay here," I told Sarah as we surveyed the damage. "My friend in Idaho—" "No," she interrupted. "This is your home, our home, if you'll have me." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I turned to face her fully. "Sarah, you don't owe me anything. You're free now, free to go anywhere, be anyone." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "That's why I'm choosing to stay, not from obligation, but because for the first time in years, I feel like myself again." She took my hand. "Besides, you promised we would rebuild, so we did." The people of Clearwater surprised me. Men I'd barely spoken to in 15 years arrived with tools and lumber. Women brought food and linens. Even old Running Fox came down from the reservation with his sons to help raise the walls of a new cabin. Spring returned to Montana, painting the land in shades of renewal. The new cabin weathered its first winter well, standing firm against mountain storms just as Sarah and I had stood against our personal tempests. Word reached us through Marshal Cooper that Reed's remaining associates had been captured in Denver, ending the final chapter of that dark story. The reward money, as Sarah had requested, went to the families of those who had died by Reed's hand. Life settled into new rhythms. We expanded the vegetable garden, added 2 milk cows to our small herd, and built a proper chicken house that no fox could penetrate. Sarah began teaching reading to the children of nearby homesteaders 3 afternoons a week, her natural gift for education blossoming in this unlikely setting. I found myself laughing again at the antics of a new collie pup we named Scout, at Sarah's determined efforts to master horseback riding, at the simple joy of waking beside her each morning. The grief that had defined me for so long didn't vanish, but it softened, making space for happiness without betraying the memory of those I'd lost. In late summer, as we sat on the porch, watching a thunderstorm roll across the valley, Sarah took my hand and placed it gently on her belly. "I thought it might not be possible," she said, eyes shining. "After what happened before." I felt the slight roundness beneath my palm and was overwhelmed by a wave of emotion too complex for words, fear and joy, memory and hope, all tangled together. "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. I pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, lavender and sunshine. More than I ever thought possible. The baby, a girl we named Elizabeth Margaret, arrived with the first snow of winter. She had Sarah's green eyes and, according to Running Fox, who attended the birth, my stubborn spirit. Looking at her small face, I saw not just our future, but a bridge to my past, a continuation rather than a replacement. One morning in early spring, when Elizabeth was nearly 4 months old, I found Sarah at the creek, the spot where I'd first seen her. She stood with the baby bundled against her chest, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "I was thinking," she said as I approached, "about all the places this water has been, all the paths it's taken to reach this moment." I wrapped my arms around them both. resting my chin on Sarah's shoulder. "And where it's going next." "Yes," she agreed, leaning back against me. Where it's going next. In the vast wilderness of our lives, we often become like weathered cabins, standing alone, bearing the marks of storms weathered and fires survived. It's easy to believe solitude is safety, that the walls we build protect us from further harm. But sometimes, it takes an unexpected arrival at our creek to remind us that healing doesn't come from isolation, but from the courage to offer shelter to another wounded soul. This tale reminds us that the law isn't always just, that marriage certificates once granted ownership instead of partnership, and that even in our darkest moments, unlikely heroes can emerge, not with grand gestures, but with simple human dignity. A plate of stew left on a porch, a hand reaching across a table, a community arriving with lumber and nails when all seems lost. Perhaps the most profound truth is that we never truly start over. Instead, we build something new from the ashes, something that honors what was lost while embracing what might yet be. Like water flowing over creek stones, we are shaped by every path we've traveled, every wound we've survived, carrying them forward into a future we dare to imagine together. Thank you for spending this time with us today. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe and follow our channel for more tales of courage, healing, and unexpected second chances.